Not everything that gets recorded is meant to be found. Not everything that happens is meant to be understood. Welcome to the last broadcast. The empty rooms. I work security dispatch at a tribal casino. Most of my job is answering phones, handling radio traffic, and keeping track of what's happening around the property. Dispatch is basically where everything comes together. If security gets called somewhere, I hear it. If somebody needs an officer, it comes through me first. The office also has access to several surveillance cameras, so during a quiet shift I'll usually have a few different areas up on the monitors while I'm doing everything else. A lot of people ask if the casino is haunted. Every casino seems to have those stories, and ours is no different. Employees talk about strange things they've seen over the years, especially people who work nights. I never really had much to contribute until one shift a few years ago. It was a pretty slow night, and my supervisor was sitting in the dispatch office with me. We were just talking while keeping an eye on the cameras. One of the monitors happened to be showing a hallway in the hotel. There wasn't anybody walking through it at the time, so I probably wouldn't have looked at it twice if the lights hadn't started flickering. They weren't turning completely off. They were just flickering enough that both of us noticed it. I pointed it out to my supervisor, and he looked over at the same monitor. We figured it was probably an electrical issue somewhere on that floor, or maybe something with the camera itself. Either way, we both kept watching for another few seconds to see if it would stop. Instead, something else caught our attention. Way down at the far end of the hallway, something started moving toward the camera. My first thought was that it was a guest walking back to their room. The longer I watched, the harder it became to tell what I was looking at. It had the general shape of a person, but there weren't any features I could make out. There wasn't a face, clothes, or anything else I could focus on. It looked more like the air itself was moving. The best comparison I can think of is the way heat rising off pavement distorts everything behind it. Whatever it was kept moving at a normal walking pace until it reached the camera. Then it passed underneath it and disappeared from view. My supervisor and I looked at each other for a second, then back at the monitor, expecting something else to happen. Nothing ever did. Nobody called security about someone wandering the hallway. Nobody reported anything strange. The cameras covering the next section of the floor never showed anyone walking through. We eventually went back to work, and that was the end of it. After that night, it just became one of those stories we'd tell whenever somebody brought up the idea that the casino might be haunted. That probably would have stayed the strangest thing I'd seen there if 2020 hadn't happened. When the pandemic first shut everything down, the casino closed for several months. Normally, the place is full of people 24 hours a day. Slot machines are constantly making noise, music is playing through the speakers, and there's always somebody walking around. During the shutdown, all of that disappeared overnight. Security still had to be there because somebody had to watch the property, but there were only about 5 of us in the entire building at any given time. After working there when it was always full of people, seeing it completely empty felt strange. You could walk through parts of the casino and hear your own footsteps echoing. Every hallway felt bigger than it actually was because there wasn't any background noise anymore. Since there were so few of us working, I always knew where everyone was. If officers were making rounds, I knew what part of the property they were checking. If maintenance was working somewhere, I knew that too. There really wasn't much room for surprises. One night, I happened to be looking at one of the exterior cameras that showed the hotel windows. A light came on in one of the rooms. The hotel was completely empty. Seeing that immediately got my attention because every room had already been checked. We knew the lights were off before the night shift started. I radioed a couple of officers and asked them to head upstairs with an access key while I stayed in dispatch and kept watching the cameras. A few minutes later, they unlocked the room. One of the bedside lamps was on. That by itself would have been strange enough, but the room looked like somebody had gone through it. Pillows were scattered around instead of being on the bed. The toilet popper had been pulled completely off the roll and left in a pile on the bathroom floor. Things were out of place in a way that didn't really make sense. The officers checked the room, found nobody inside, turned the lamp back off, and locked the door when they left. We documented everything in case there turned out to be a simple explanation later. A few nights later, it happened again. A different room lit up. The officers went upstairs. Another empty room. Another lamp turned on. Another room that looked like somebody had tossed it around before leaving. That pattern continued through the entire shutdown. Before every shift, we'd verify the hotel rooms were empty and the lights were off. At some point during the night, another room would light up. We'd send officers to check it, and they'd find another empty room with furniture or bedding disturbed for no obvious reason. We never found anyone hiding in the hotel. We never figured out why the lights kept coming on. After the casino finally reopened, the reports stopped because the hotel filled up with guests again and life went back to normal. Out of everything I've seen working security, those two experiences are the ones I still think about the most. I still have no explanation for whatever moved through that hallway on camera, and I have even less of an explanation for what kept happening in those empty hotel rooms during the shutdown. Footsteps. A few years ago, I lived in a small apartment building with 8 units. There were 4 apartments upstairs and 4 downstairs. My apartment was on the 2nd floor, and the unit directly below mine had been sitting vacant for a while. Nobody had moved in after the previous tenant left, so I got used to the idea that the apartment underneath me was completely empty. One evening, I was home by myself when I started hearing footsteps below me. At first, I didn't think much of it. Apartment buildings are full of random noises, and sound has a weird way of traveling through walls and floors. I figured I was hearing one of the neighbors, even though it sounded like it was coming from directly underneath me. A few minutes later, I heard them again. It sounded like someone was walking from one end of the apartment to the other. The steps were steady, then they stopped for a while before starting again. That was when it finally hit me that the apartment below mine was supposed to be empty. I tried to come up with a reasonable explanation. Maybe the sound was carrying from another unit. Maybe the empty apartment made everything echo in a strange way. I walked into different rooms to see if the sound changed depending on where I was standing, but every time I heard the footsteps, they still seemed to be coming from directly below me. After 20 or 30 minutes, I started wondering if I was imagining the whole thing. I called someone I knew and asked them to stop by for a few minutes because I wanted another opinion. I didn't tell them some wild story. I just said I kept hearing footsteps in an apartment that should have been vacant, and I wanted to know if they heard the same thing. They came over, and we stood there listening. It didn't take long. A few minutes later, we both heard it. The footsteps started again and moved across the apartment below us exactly the way I had been hearing them all evening. At least I knew I wasn't losing my mind. We spent the next hour listening to the same thing over and over. The footsteps would stop for a while, then start again somewhere else in the apartment. Every time we thought they were finished, we'd hear someone walking again. Eventually, I decided there wasn't any good reason for somebody to be inside that apartment. If the landlord had sent a maintenance worker over, I figured I would have heard about it. Besides, this had been going on for far too long. I called the landlord first. After explaining what we were hearing, I also called the police because something about the whole situation felt wrong. Officers arrived a short time later and went to check the vacant apartment. It turned out someone had forced their way inside through one of the windows. The footsteps we'd been hearing for the last hour were coming from a man who had been walking back and forth inside the apartment. He was carrying a knife. Finding out there really had been someone down there was bad enough. Finding out he had been armed the entire time made the whole thing a lot harder to forget. Every now and then, I'll hear a strange noise in whatever place I'm living, and my first instinct is still to come up with a logical explanation. Most of the time there is one. That night, there wasn't. The door handle. A few years ago, I went on vacation and stayed at a hotel for about a week. It wasn't a luxury place, but it was clean, quiet, and close to everything I wanted to see. Check-in was easy, the staff seemed friendly, and my room was exactly what I expected. The first day or two went by without anything unusual happening. The first strange thing happened in the middle of the night. I woke up to the sound of someone moving the handle on my room door. At first, I thought I was still half asleep, but then I heard it again. The handle was moving back and forth over and over, almost like someone was trying to open the door without a key. It wasn't a single attempt by somebody who had the wrong room. Whoever was outside kept trying the handle for several seconds. Before I could even get out of bed, it stopped. I walked over and looked through the peephole, but the hallway was empty. I figured someone had probably gotten confused after a night of drinking and wandered off before I reached the door. Hotels are full of people coming and going at all hours, so I didn't think much of it and went back to sleep. The next night it happened again. Once again, it was in the middle of the night while I was in a deep sleep. The sound woke me almost instantly. The handle shook hard enough that I could hear the latch moving inside the door. It sounded like somebody was putting real effort into getting inside. Just like the night before, everything stopped the moment I woke up. I checked the hallway again and didn't see anyone. By the third night, I started dreading going to sleep. I kept wondering if it would happen again, and eventually it did. The pattern never changed. It always happened in the middle of the night. Always woke me up, and always stopped before I had a chance to see who had been outside my room. After several nights of this, I finally mentioned it to the hotel manager. I expected him to apologize and maybe tell me they would check the security cameras. Instead, he immediately knew what I was talking about. He explained that one of the guests had recently been released from a mental institution. So, according to him, the man still believed he was living there. He would sleepwalk through the hotel and try random door handles, sometimes even kicking at doors because he thought he was trying to get out of the facility. The manager said the behavior became much worse whenever the man stopped taking his medication. I asked why they hadn't removed him from the hotel if they already knew this had been happening. The manager looked uncomfortable before explaining that the man's family was extremely wealthy and had a lot of influence in the area. He made it sound like nobody wanted to risk creating a problem by asking him to leave. Whether that was hotel policy or simply his own decision, I never found out. Knowing there was an explanation should have made me feel better. Instead, it made sleeping even harder. Every night I kept wondering if the sound outside my door was going to start again. Every time I woke up suddenly, I listened for movement in the hallway before trying to fall back asleep. It got to the point where I wasn't getting much rest at all. The manager wasn't exaggerating when he said the behavior had been getting worse. As the week went on, the attempts became more aggressive. Instead of somebody quietly testing the handle, it sounded like whoever was outside was trying to force the door open. A couple of times, I honestly thought the door might give way if it kept going. By the end of the week, I had completely lost interest in finishing my vacation. I checked out earlier than I had planned because I couldn't spend another night wondering if somebody was going to be trying my door again at 3 in the morning. I've stayed in plenty of hotels since then and have never experienced anything like it again. Even now, if I wake up in the middle of the night in a hotel room, the first thing I do is look at the door.